Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the month of Dhul Hijjah. We have been presented with another golden opportunity to perform good deeds. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about this month, there are no good deeds that are more beloved to me than those performed in this month. So we should increase in our good deeds and our charitable acts, nawafil, and more importantly, the dhikr. But we also should reflect upon the khutbah al-wada, which is the farewell sermon delivered by the Prophet ﷺ during this time. And not many of us know much about the farewell sermon. So today, inshallah, what we'll do is spend a little bit of time just going through some of the hadiths and some of the collections from books of seerah, talking and reflecting upon the khutbah al-wada. What were the final words or the advice the Prophet ﷺ gave the people? And those presented there reported that it was such a moving speech that they all had quickly recognized that this was a farewell sermon. And it's been reported saying that those that were present, their hearts melted at the speech and their eyes were caused to overflow with tears. That's how influential the speech was and the amount of impact it had. The Prophet ﷺ started off with saying, Ayyuhan nasu isma'u qawli. Oh, you people, listen to my words. Or in other translations, give me an attentive ear, or listen to me very carefully. And he says, I do not know whether I will ever meet you at this place after this year. So he's already informed them that they need to pay attention because he's not going to be amongst them for long. And he explains to them that their blood, their property, and their honor are sacred as the day that they are in, meaning the day of khutbah al-wada, the month that they are in, which is Dhul Hijjah, and the city that they are standing in, which is Makkah, or the surrounding areas of Makkah. So why did the Prophet ﷺ liken the property and honor of the Muslims to Dhul Hijjah and Makkah? Because the Arabs knew the sacredness of this month. They understood it very well. And they understood the sacredness of that city that they stood upon. So to liken the property and honor of another Muslim meant that it was also at the same level of sacredness. Because in the Jahiliyyah time, in the pre-Islamic times, even though they were not Muslims, they would often insult each other's honor and rob each other from their property. So the Prophet ﷺ wanted to, before leaving, tell them the importance of their property and honor and compared it to the sacred month and the city. He goes on to tell them about the paganism, the practices of paganism, and said they are and ignorance are both under my feet, meaning he's abolished Jahiliyyah and the practices that came before. And subhanAllah, we see us falling back into those previous ignorance, days of ignorance, which the Prophet ﷺ said he's abolished. And he went on to say that the claim that he first abolished the shares of avenging somebody's death, because it was common to avenge a death, and the avenging of somebody's death could lead to years and centuries, and it could become tribal feuds. So the Prophet ﷺ said he will abolish the revenge of the murder of Ibn Rabi'ah, who was murdered by the tribe of Sa'd, so that it doesn't become an ongoing war within those two tribes. He also abolished interest, usury, and he said that the first type of interest that I will abolish is that of Abbas bin Abdul Muttalib, who was the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ. So he reminisces the interest owed to him, abolishing it. The Prophet ﷺ then reminded the people and said, O people, fear Allah concerning women. He said, verily you have taken them on the security of Allah with his words. So it is now obligatory upon you to act in proper manner with them and to honor their conjugal rights. And as you're over an authority over them, you shouldn't abuse them in a severe manner. If you need to chastise them in certain circumstances, which is obviously, if we read Surah Nisa, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned them allowing a non-Muslim into the house, and not allowing them to sit on the bed, which means having intimate relations with somebody behind your husband's back. So that's when your husband can chastise you. But it cannot be severe and it cannot be an abusive way. Now, what does chastise mean? Now, other speakers have said that it's really a symbolic way of informing your wife that she has wronged you, and that would be equivalent to a miswak, a toothbrush, symbolic hitting, because beating is not allowed, and the Prophet ﷺ forbade that. He told the men that they have to be responsible towards women. They need to clothe them suitably and need to provide for them. And in turn, the wife should be obedient and faithful to the husbands because they are responsible for them. So if they are fulfilling their responsibility, you also need to fulfill your responsibility of obedience. The Prophet ﷺ reminded us that he has left amongst us the book of Allah, and he said, hold fast to it and you shall never go astray. Now, there are many people that I speak to, they say that the other hadith in which it says Muslims will split into 72 or 73 sects, and only one will go to Jannah. So in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ didn't specify exactly which one it was. But if we look at the Khutbah al-Wada, what we come to realize is the only sect that will be successful is that holds on to the Quran, to the book of Allah. And in Hadith Tirmidhi, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that there will, after I leave you, there will become discord amongst yourselves. So hold fast to the Sunnah and the Sunnah of my companions, and beware of bid'ah, as all bid'ah is misguidance. So he's now left two distinct things amongst us which act as a salvation, a guidance for us, and they are the book of Allah and the Sunnah. And these are the things that we need to relate back to. And I hear often many people say to me, well, there is nothing wrong in the practices that I'm doing. If I read something extra, or if I introduce an extra nawafil, there's nothing wrong in performing the act. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually gives an answer to that, and this is included in the Khutbah al-Wada, the final sermon of the Prophet ﷺ. Towards the end, I will mention that point and link it back to this point of us adding things to the deen and saying that there's nothing wrong with adding something good, because if that's the case, then would the Prophet ﷺ or the companions really leave it out? If we are introducing something that we think that we have more knowledge about than the Prophet or the companions put together, then we are really mistaken, because we are now making ourselves or our knowledge far more superior than theirs, and this is a sin. This is wrong, a great wrongdoing on our part, and this is what we need to take seriously. So the two things that we need to hold fast to are the Quran and the Sunnah, and be aware of any innovations. He goes on to say, O people, I'm not succeeded by a prophet, and you're not succeeded by a nation. So I recommend you to worship your Lord, to pray your 5 prayers, to fast in Ramadan, and to offer zakat. And if you can perform your pilgrimage, your hajj to the sacred house of your Lord, then do that. And he also then mentions that you obey those who are in charge of you, and you will be rewarded with Jannah if you do so. Obeying those in authority is a really important point. Now, you could only turn and revolt in very stringent conditions, and they have been laid out in hadith, which I don't really want to go into in now. But you are not allowed to revolt against a leader until they commit clear shirk, which you can establish. And you cannot revolt against anybody who may not be upholding Sharia rules. You cannot be revolt against anybody who may be oppressing. You've got to revolt only if there is clear evidence of them openly committing shirk. So this is really important, because we cause a lot more chaos and divisions within our community because we don't understand the deen. So why did the Prophet ﷺ talk about authority? Because it damages the unity amongst the Ummah. And he said, obey even a black slave appointed among you as a leader, even if he's mutilated, as long as he upholds the book of Allah. So it goes back to upholding the book of Allah. He continues and says, your Lord is one, your Father is one. No Arab is superior than a non-Arab, neither white over a black, and nor a black person over white, except for those who have taqwa. So, if you think about why the Prophet ﷺ mentioned distinctly a black leader, because if we think about our times now, we are struggling with racism in this modern time. We've just had the football match in which England played, and we saw lots of racism against the black players because they lost. So we still have this battle with racism in our modern time. But think about at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, in the midst of the desert, he addressed the issue of racism, and not only addressed or gave rights to the blacks, he even made them to succeed or make them to a level of authority. He gave them the right of not just rights of human rights. He didn't just give them human rights, he actually gave them rights of an authority of being present, part of the society and the community, being presented as somebody in a ruling position. And he said, even if they've been put in charge, obey them. And if you think about in the pre-Islamic time in Arabia and the Arabs, they struggled with giving blacks their the normal human rights. So let alone accepting them as a leader amongst them. This was unthinkable. It's unthinkable in our times. Subhanallah. And look at the Prophet. He didn't just give them the rights, he went a step ahead. It's such an innovative speech that he gave. It's so, subhanallah, proactive in making the society as one and integrating it together. So he gives that advice, and he says that nobody succeeds except them who have taqwa. He then says that those who have borrowed anything, they should return it, and that person who's taken the responsibility to overlook at what was borrowed, to ensure that it was returned, the goods are returned, they are the responsible person. They've taken that responsibility, and they need to make sure that the goods that have been borrowed are returned. Debt should be paid off. Now, somebody once asked me, what is better? Is it charity, water charity, or is it debt? Now, there's many hadiths that say that the best charity is water. But there's also a hadith where a person who died who had a debt, and somebody came forward and said this person hasn't paid their debt. So the Prophet ﷺ said, before we prayed the Salatul Janazah, so he delayed Salatul Janazah until the debt was paid, and somebody came forward and said, I'll pay it, O Prophet, on his behalf. So they proceeded to do the funeral prayers and bury the person, and then after a day or two, the Prophet ﷺ met that person who volunteered to pay this debt off, and he said to him, have you paid off the debt? And he said, yes, O Prophet, I did. And he said, good, now your brother's grave will be called. So here this hinders the janazah salah, the funeral prayer, and it acts as a barrier in our barzakh. So it's far more important to pay off a debt, and you should not take a debt unless it is super necessary, unless it is in a dire need and necessity for you to take that debt. Do not take it. And those people in the position of forgoing it, the Quran says you should forgo it as charity, especially with those people who are poor and cannot afford to pay you back. So the Prophet ﷺ then goes on to say that and you will be asked about what you're going to say. So you're going to be asked about me. What are you going to say? And they replied, we bear witness that you have conveyed the message and fulfilled your mission. He then raised his forefinger towards the sky and then moved it down towards the people, saying, O Allah, bear witness. And he said this thrice. And it was at that point that at the point of Mount Arafat, that a ayah was revealed. The last ayah of the whole revelation was revealed. And it read, Al-Yawma aklamtu lakum dinukum. Today I have perfected your religion for you. And here, if we look at the words of Umar Khattab, he said, nothing succeeds perfection but imperfection. So if everything has been made perfect, when you say that I'm adding something or I'm doing something extra, and what's wrong with that? Well, if you think that what you're adding is better than what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already decreed, then you are mistaken, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself has said He has completed the deen. And the words of Umar are very clear in this aspect, where he said, it's now perfect. This is perfection, and nothing succeeds perfection unless it's imperfect. So please be aware of adding matters to the deen, because here what you're doing is changing the deen after the Prophet ﷺ, and you cannot make it more perfect than it already is, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed on the Yawm al-Arafat, this is the day where He completed His favor upon us by completing the deen, making it a complete deen for us. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.